Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and guests. It's December the 4th, 2023, and this is a regular online meeting of the West Shore Photography Club. If you got my email today, you already know we have a change in the program. Our buddy Kurt Berliger from Vermont is snowed in at home, no electricity, unable to communicate with us. So we're going to postpone his program until another evening. So Joe will be in touch, but this evening I'm taking over, and I'll explain that in just a minute. Our next online meeting will be in 2 weeks. That'll be December the 18th. Joe will be giving you a summary of that in just a moment. But before we get to that, let me make a comment about my upcoming trip. Some of you already know that my wife and I have been married for a long, long time. And to celebrate that, we started planning a world cruise a number of years ago. It was actually planned to take place 2 years ago, and then something called a pandemic interrupted our plans. Well, January the 2nd, we leave for a 4-month around the world cruise.
Oh my God.
Okay. Very much looking forward to that. Let me silence somebody here. We've got some folks making some noise in the background. So I am happy to say that the club will continue on, of course. Joe is going to fill in my absence with some help from some other club members, specifically from Mark Albano. I will be around until the end of this month, but beginning January the 2nd, I will be gone for 4 months. So never fear. I'll still have email communication, so I'll be in touch with Joe, and if you want to be in touch with me, certainly do that, and I'll respond via email. But I appreciate the efforts of Joe and Mark and the other folks who are filling in. We have a meeting next Monday night, Mark Corchado, Mark Albano, Joe, and myself to make plans for that time period. So,
Venus, where are you leaving from?
Fort Lauderdale, Florida, go through the Panama Canal, go over to Los Angeles, then to Hawaii, then to the South Pacific, New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, and then the part I'm worried about, coming back home through the Suez Canal and back to Fort Lauderdale. So got my fingers crossed that everything will go smoothly. So that's enough of that. Let's get on with the rest of the news. Joe, trips and the program on December the 18th.
Okay, the trips. This past Saturday, we went to Gerhardt Machinery. We had 11 folks there, and I've been there numerous times, and I have to tell you, this was the best light. It was foggy in the morning, so we had no harsh shadows. This is old equipment that when you have these harsh shadows, you get into this HDR business, and we had nothing of that. It was just soft, gorgeous light. And then as the morning came on, we got a little bit more light because the clouds were dissipating. It was fantastic. It was great. We will be doing that again because that's a very popular trip. You could do that 10 times, and each time you go, you will find something different to photograph. We're talking acres upon acres upon acres of old rusty equipment. So that was Saturday. And we have coming up is Norbert Fry on with us tonight. Norbert, are you there?
Check my list here.
No, he's not. Okay. We have a trip coming up next Saturday, the 9th. It's to the Rolls-Royce and the Bentley Museum. And Norbert has arranged for us to come in, to go in at 10:45 a.m. and spend an hour or two photographing the details of these vehicles and the cars. And this is a very nice museum to go to, and it's a delight to see these vehicles and get up close, some very new ones and some old ones, and photograph them. We have a meeting coming up on the 18th on a Monday night. Jennifer King is going to talk to us about black and white photography. It's a 2-part program. The first part will be how she envisions the capturing process. How does she see in black and white? And then the second part, which will be this at the 30-minute mark, she's then going to process 2 images, and she's going to take them from color to black and white. And this is fine art black and white. And she's going to talk about her techniques, which are unique to her, but are very easy to follow. And we're going to have that session, and that'll be really, really cool. We have coming up a trip. We were going to go to Anderson Mill, but we're going to go to Heisman Mill, which is close to us here in the Carlisle area, and it's a really, really good place. We're going to be doing that coming up. And then we have a trip coming to the state capitol, and that's narrowing it down. And that's one of our signature trips, and that's going to be here in mid-January. And we will be doing the internal parts of the Capitol. It'll be a private tour. It'll be just us, and it'll be photography related, so we can go to we'll have access to some of the sort of out of the way places. So that'll be that coming up. And that's really far as out. We have a lot more planned, but that's the most immediate ones coming up.
Very good. Thanks, Joe. Okay, let me share my screen and I'll tell you what this is all about this evening.
And we don't have to take notes, right, Dennis? You're going to...
You do not. Yeah, tomorrow
Okay.
I will give you a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. And I'm always torn when I put together a PowerPoint presentation between providing too much detail and being obscure in the PowerPoint, and the other option is to not put enough information that when you get a copy of it, you can't follow it. So I think with the PowerPoint presentation and the video, you should be fine. Well, even with just the PowerPoint, you should be fine. My presentation is entitled Pixels, Bits, Resolution, What's It All About? Bytes. What's it all about? The concept for this presentation has been stewing with me for a couple of years, actually, because as a former physics teacher, I've always been concerned about the consistent application of terms. It's important that in any business, whether it's or any hobby, whether it's photography or the medical profession or electricians, whatever you're dealing with, it's important that people are speaking the same language and they understand that what terms mean. Okay, so I realized a long time ago that some of this stuff can be very confusing. And I'm going back to my roots here. My goal when I taught physics was to try to take concepts that seemed complex and boil them down so that people could understand them. I realized that a lot of people aren't mathematically oriented. Okay, and that was probably one of my weaknesses too when I got into the higher levels of physics. So I try to keep the math level low. And tonight there won't be much math involved at all, and we'll talk about that. So I will give you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, but nonetheless, here we go. My goal is to simplify and to avoid some confusion in creating a common language with these terms. So let's start with, what is a byte? Or what is a pixel, rather? Start with a pixel. A pixel, by definition, is the tiniest building block of a digital photo. Okay, you might think of it as a tile, a single tile in a mosaic. Okay, it's the smallest part of a digital image. So you look at this picture they took in the fall up at Fuller Lake, and you don't realize it, but it's made up of millions of little pixels. Of course, you all know that if you zoom in far enough, like to 1600%, your image will look pixelated because you start seeing the individual pixels. So even though there are millions of them making up the picture, if you zoom in far enough, you're going to get to the point where you start looking at these little building blocks, these individual pixels. So let's analyze the pixels in a photo. Here's a photo illustration that overly simplifies the concept, but I think it's a good place to start. Okay, we look at the sensor or the picture supposedly on the right-hand side there, and the first question, or the couple questions that we might ask. Okay, each dot represents a pixel. So the first question is, how high is this image in pixels? So we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we'd say this image is, or this illustration is 7 pixels high. Not too tough yet, right? Okay, keep it simple. How many wide? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's also 7 pixels wide. 7 pixels high, 7 pixels wide. I know it's an overly simplified illustration, but we'll look at something a little more complex later. Okay, so you might ask, well, what are the pixel dimensions? Okay, and this is the best way to express the size of a photo, a digital photo. What are its pixel dimensions? And of course, we just said the pixel dimensions for this illustration are 7 pixels high and 7 pixels wide. Okay, now the next question we might ask, well, how many total pixels are there in this illustration? Well, there are a couple ways to find out. Here's the old-fashioned way, like counting on your fingers. Let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 30. Okay, well, that's pretty laborious, right? And we all know that you don't have to do it that way. There's a quicker way. You can just take the rows and add them up. 7 plus 7 is 14, plus 7 is 21, plus 7 is 28. Well, you're already ahead of me, right? Because you mathematicians know there's an even easier way. Okay, you're calculating the same as you'd calculate the area of a room. So to get the total number of pixels in the illustration, you just multiply the height by the width. In this case, it's 7 by 7, which is 49. So we very quickly have been able to determine the pixel dimensions of this illustration, 7 pixels by 7 pixels, and the total number of pixels that are in the image itself, 7 times 7, which is 49. Okay? Now, let's take a little more complex but still, again, an illustration. We'll go through this in a similar fashion, but very quickly. This illustration shows that there are 1,000 pixels supposedly in each block of this image. So you can think of this as a photograph or of the sensor in your camera, okay? Because the pixels in the image come from the photo sites, on your camera sensor. So we have, let's ask again, what is the height of this photo in pixels? Well, there's 1,000 in each block. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 pixels make up the height, okay, if you were to count them. And the width, of course, 9,000. Okay, so the pixel dimensions of this sensor or this photograph created by the digital sensor are 6,000 pixels by 9,000 pixels. Okay, and this is a fairly typical example. This could be the sensor in your camera. So we would say, if somebody asks you, what's the size of the photographs that you get, that your camera produces for you? This is the absolute best way, okay, to indicate that, the pixel dimensions. And you can find the pixel dimensions of your camera pretty easily. And this is, let's say, we'll be considering the maximum size, the largest number of pixels that your camera sensor can capture. So in summary, pixel dimensions of a photo or a sensor is the height in pixels times the width in pixels. And in this case, it's 6,000 pixels by 9,000 pixels. All right. So as I say, that's the best way to determine or to indicate or express the size of a digital photograph. It's very precise. A pixel is just a really, really tiny little piece. And when you say you have 6,000 of them by 9,000 of them, yeah, that's a very precise numbers. Now, let's use the shortcut that we used the last time with our simplified illustration. And we say, okay, if I have 6,000 pixels high and 9,000 pixels wide, how many total pixels are there in this image? Well, we did the same thing. We multiply the height by the width. When you do, get out your calculators. 6,000 times 9,000 is 54 million. Okay, this is the number you get. So if you go, these are hundreds, thousands, millions. So if you get a number like this, when you multiply the pixel dimensions of your camera sensor and you get a big number like this, you just move the decimal place over 6 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, boom. And then you have 54 million pixels, okay? Or as we've abbreviated, 54 MP. 54 MP, just an abbreviation. Nobody wants to say, oh, I have 54, 000, 000 pixels. No. There's an easier way to say it, just an abbreviation, 54 megapixels. Now, if you're wondering about MBs, megabytes, we're going to get to that. It's an entirely different thing. Okay, we're talking MPs, not military police either. We're talking megapixels here, megapixels. Okay.
So if you have a crop sensor,
Difficult question already. Go ahead.
does any of this change, or how does that work?
Essentially, no. Ideally, let's just think of a sensor, no matter whether it's a crop sensor or what. Yeah, you might have a sensor that would give you fewer pixels in the height and fewer pixels on the width, and definitely there are. But let's talk hypothetically first, and then we'll get to more specific examples.
Okay.
So
Thank
whatever your sensor is, you can look it up in the camera manual, and it'll tell you how many pixels high and how many pixels wide, and then you can multiply the two numbers. That'll give you your pixel dimensions. You can multiply the two numbers together, and you get a big number like that, and then you can convert it to megapixels. So theoretically, that's how many megapixels your photograph, your camera sensor has, and your photos it creates are. And that's what we call the size of the photograph. That's the size of the photograph. Okay, here's some examples. I have a Canon R6, and it has a sensor which will capture 20.1 million pixels. As a comparison, the Canon R5 has a lot more, over twice as many, a total of 45.1 million pixels. The Nikon Z9, 45.7, and the Sony AR7 IV, 61 million pixels. Okay, now, if you say to yourself, well, I don't need that many pixels, that's overkill for me, then yes, you could, in your camera in the menu system, tell it not to keep as many pixels. It will initially capture all of those pixels, but then it can do what we call downsizing. If you say, I don't need that many, it's too many for me, then you tell the camera, oh, let's downsize it, and it'll give you options. Okay. And so you could have the camera downsized to a lesser number. My suggestion, don't do that. Okay. Storage is fairly cheap. You know, the more pixels you have, the more space they're going to take up, but you never know how large you're going to need an image. And we'll get into printing before we're done this evening. But my recommendation is, if you haven't lately, if you're not sure about this, start your camera up tomorrow or later tonight. Go to the menu system where it says image quality, image size and quality. I would recommend you leave that on the highest setting, the largest number of pixels that give you the largest size. Because, as we'll find out, later on in the program, you can always downsize your image without a problem. Downsizing is okay, but if you tell your camera, oh, get rid of a lot of those pixels, I just want a smaller final image, and then you decide later, oh, I really love that picture, I'm going to print it large on my wall, and you go, I'm going to have a problem, okay? Because it's more difficult to upsize an image than it is to downsize. Okay. So one other thing about your camera sensor, let's compare the height to the width. Okay. It's 6,000 pixels high, this one in my illustration, and 9,000 pixels wide. Well, we can look at that as a ratio. As a ratio, it's 2 to 3. Okay, because it's 6,000 pixels and 9,000 pixels, And if you multiply 2 times 3,000, you get 6,000. And if you multiply 3 times 3,000, you get 9,000. So that means that the height to the width, the ratio of the height to the width is 2 to 3. And you probably know where I'm going with this. You know what that's called. Okay, that's called the aspect ratio of your sensor. 2 to 3, or sometimes they reverse it around. You might hear people say 3 to 2, same thing, but it's the ratio of the height to the width. Now, not all cameras, the Canon, my Canon, the R6 has that aspect ratio 2 to 3, and that's the most common, for digital cameras. And it also is consistent with film. Okay, the old film, 35 millimeter film had an aspect ratio of 3 to 2 or 2 to 3. Okay, but not all cameras do. Okay, Olympus cameras, for example, have an aspect ratio of 4 to 3. Okay, they're more squarish, but that doesn't matter. The concepts we're talking about are generic for all digital cameras. Yeah, just the aspect ratio might be different. Okay, we're going to get into Bytes. Anybody have a question so far? Just feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask.
Dennis, this is
Yes.
Joan Smith. I
Yes,
have
Joan.
a question. I have a Sony. I've got the 61 megapixel camera. There's an option in the menu settings that I can make a compressed file. Is that downsizing the number of pixels or not? I have it set for compressed files.
Okay, and that's not necessarily bad. Is it a compressed RAW file?
Yes, sir.
Yes, okay. From what I've read, no, it maintains the same number of pixels, but it uses an algorithm to reduce the size of the file. And we're going to get into this a little bit later. Well, we're getting into it now with Bytes. But it's, from what I read, it's not a bad thing. The photos will take up a little less space on your hard drive, but you'll still maintain the quality with a compressed RAW. Now, JPEGs are compressed, but that's a little bit different story that we'll talk a little bit more about later. Okay,
Right.
well, let's start
Well,
from the
good.
beginning with storage space. When we talk about a byte, what's a byte?
Excuse me, Dennis.
Yes,
This is
David.
Dave Marchetto. Can I ask a question here?
Sure, shoot.
Yeah, this is really helpful. Here's my confusion. Pixels are different sizes on different sensors, right? So
Not enough
that's
to really worry about. I mean, what I'm doing here is oversimplifying things a little bit. So to keep it moving, but technically, yes, they are slightly different sizes, and then you could get into which ones are better for noise reduction, for reducing noise. Is it the larger photo sites or the smaller photo sites? I don't want to get into that much depth in this and detail with this presentation, but yes, there can be a slight difference in the size of the photo sites on the camera sensor.
leave it to me to make things confusing.
Well, the whole issue can very quickly go into a wormhole, and we can be sucked into a real pixel peeping type of discussion. So I am going to simplify it and keep it on the surface a little bit, and it certainly begs questions that get into this in more depth. Some I can deal with tonight, and some I just have to kind of ignore and go on for the presentation. But yeah, I would encourage you, Dave, to Google that, look into it, and it is an interesting discussion because they do find out that the photo sites on sensors do have slightly different sizes, and it does affect how they how much noise they pick up compared to
Thank you.
compared to the signal versus noise ratio. Okay, so back to, here's the important thing. A byte is a very, very small amount of storage space. Okay, think of when you take a mouthful of food and you take a bite. Okay, you can either take a large bite or you can take a small bite, but it talks about how much you've chewed off. With digital photos, a byte is how much storage space is being consumed on your hard drive. Okay, hang in there and follow along. Now, because a byte is so small, and our pictures have a lot of information in them, and they take up lots of bytes. Okay, the math department has come up, well, it came up with years ago, with ways to categorize large numbers. So as most of you know, if you can have kilo meaning 1,000. Well, I'll just jump to the next slide. Kilobyte is 1,000 bytes. Kilobyte. Bytes are very small. So if you have 1,000 of them together, that's 1 kilobyte. If you have 1,000,000 bytes, then that's a megabyte. So here we got MB. MB, it's talking about storage space on your hard drive, how much space it takes. It's not saying anything about how many pixels there are. These are two different concepts. MB does not equal MP. Okay, so here MB is 1,000,000 bytes. That's the space it takes up on your hard drive. And if you have a gigabyte of space, you're actually talking 1,000,000,000 bytes. And oh my goodness, if you have a hard drive that has a couple terabytes of storage space, it has it's able to store a couple trillion bytes of information. Just goes to show you how small one individual byte is. All right. So as some examples, okay, if you had a single photo from your camera, it might, as I showed you earlier, it might go anywhere. It might consume between 20 megabytes on your hard drive or your memory card, up to maybe 60 or more. There are some, cameras out there that have huge sensors that give you huge files. Now, yes, if you have a 60 megabyte file, it's most probably going to have more pixels than a 20 megabyte file. Okay, but there's not a one-to-one correlation. So we'll talk about megapixels and megabytes separately. Okay, they're not the same thing. Megabytes refer to the storage taken up on your hard drive. So if you crop that single photo down quite a bit because there's a bird that you want to show and you want to enlarge it on the screen, that file might only take up, that crop file might only take up 100 kilobytes. Okay. Okay. So it takes up a lot less space. So if you submit an image, if you crop an image severely and you submit it to a West Shore Photography Club image review or a competition, and Mike Donovan puts it up on the screen and it doesn't look quite right, and we wonder why, and we look at how much space the photo took up on the hard drive, and we see that it's 100 kilobytes, that's a pretty good indicator that you didn't send us, you sent us a pretty small file, okay? And it's just not going to look good, okay? Now, if you do a pano, then you're combining multiple photos together and they can get huge. You might have, as an example, you might have a composite that's 300 megabytes. I've heard of guys people who have had composites of a gigabyte, really, huge files. And of course, as we mentioned, your external hard drives, these days, a 1 terabyte external hard drive is considered pretty small, okay? You won't be able to store too many photographs on that hard drive because it just doesn't, it's not able to hold enough. Whereas they have single hard drives now that can hold up to 20 terabytes or more. That's a lot of photos, okay? A lot of storage space, all right? Now, there is a relationship between megapixels and megabytes, as I mentioned earlier, as a little teaser. Generally speaking, yeah, you can say when you have more pixels, they're going to take up more space, but it's not one-to-one, okay? To estimate, if you know how many megapixels you have in your file, and you want to estimate how much space it's going to take up on your hard drive, multiply by 3, okay? That'll give you an estimate. Now, it's only a rough estimate. Hang on. I'll explain. It's only a rough estimate. So as an example, if I had, the photo out of my R6, my Canon R6, it comes out at about 20 megapixels. 20 million pixels making up that image, height and width. Okay, visualize that, height and width. Remember my illustration? Okay. If I want to guesstimate how much space that's going to take up on my memory card, okay, because I want to buy a new card and I want to know, well, how big should I get a card that's reasonable? Yeah, how many pictures is it going to hold? Well, just as an estimate, rough estimate, you could do for every picture, 3 times 20 is 60, and that's megabytes. So each picture would take up approximately 60 megabytes of space on the card or your hard drive. Okay. So one way to think of it, this is a little bit of a simplification too, but we know that there are 3 basic colors. Okay. The 3, red, blue, and green that make up an image. So think of it as, well, there's 3 colors. So each bit of information, each pixel requires 3 bits, 1 for each color. Okay. So 3 times the number of megapixels would give you the approximate number of megabytes. Megabytes is storage space. Now, I just threw this slide in so you have it with your PowerPoint presentation, but here's what it shows. If I go to Photoshop, and I don't care if you use Photoshop or not, I'm just using a little calculator in there that shows information about the picture. So if I go into Photoshop, and if you do use Photoshop or you want to, just go into Photoshop and go up to image and click on image and then image size. And this is a little diagram, dialog box that comes up. Okay. And here's what it says. The image that I'm having displayed currently has the pixel dimensions of 4,032 pixels high, or I'm sorry, this turns them backwards, wide by 2,258 pixels high. Okay, those are the pixel dimensions, just like we talked about before. So if I want to know the total number of pixels in this image, I just multiply. That's what we did before with the little illustration. Remember, 7 pixels by 7 pixels? It has 49 pixels in. Or 6,000 pixels by 9,000 pixels gives us 54 million pixels. Well, here we multiply them together, and I already did this on my calculator, and it comes out 9,104,256 pixels. So I use my abbreviation, move my decimal point over 6, and it's equal to 9.1 megapixels. So I now know how many pixels make up this image that's being displayed. 9.1 million pixels. 9.1 megapixels. So if I want to estimate how much space it's taking up on my hard drive, I just go 3 times that is approximately 27. Well, let's check that. Photoshop tells us, you look up at the top here, it says image size. Well, what it should say is image storage size. Okay, it's not the size of the file, it's how much storage space it's consuming. And the other thing I don't like is they just put an M. It should be MB, MB for megabytes. So Photoshop is telling me this image, this photo consumes 26.0 megabytes of storage space. Well, that's not exactly what I calculated. I calculated 27. There's a little discrepancy. That's not the point. The point is, oh, that's pretty close. I'm almost right on. Why is there a discrepancy? Well, as I told you earlier, generally it's true that more pixels take up more space. So a photo with more megapixels would take up more space. It would take up more megabytes. Okay. But it's not a simple relationship, and it depends on a lot of things. Here's a very busy slide. My research shows that the amount of storage space that a picture consumes on a hard drive is dependent on all of these factors. The first one, is the number of pixels in the photo. But the second one is the format. Is it RAW or is it JPEG? Okay, RAW files take up more storage space just by their basic nature. What's the bit depth? And you say, what the heck's bit depth? Well, we'll talk about that later. But the bit depth also determines the amount of storage space that the photo will take up. So does the compression level. Ooh, that's a big one. Because as Joan indicated, showing her camera, she can go full or no compression on a RAW file or compressed RAW. And some cameras will even offer various degrees of compressed RAW. And they certainly offer varying qualities of JPEGs. So you can choose based on the amount of storage space you want the image to take up, but that shouldn't be your consideration. Your consideration should be the quality of the image. That's what I'm most concerned about. So what I'm saying here is you could have different photos, or you could have the same photo, let's say the same photo, and the way it's presented, it will take up with the same pixel dimensions, and they'll take up different amounts of space on your hard drive because of these 11 factors. Let me give you an example. Here's an example. You could have a picture. I had a picture I looked at. It was in the format. It was a PSD in Photoshop, and it took up 26.5 megabytes of storage space, just the way I indicated in Photoshop, just the way I showed you earlier with the dialog box. Then I converted it to a JPEG at the highest quality, 12. Oh my, it only took up 7.2 megabytes. Then I converted it to a quality 8 JPEG, still a JPEG, still the same number of megapixels. I didn't change the megapixels. I did not resize, as they say. I just changed the format and the compression. So look at the file. Can go way, way down, okay, based on the file type, and JPEG files are greatly compressed. Now, what's compression? Well, it's kind of complex. Just to give you a basic idea, if you don't know, the computer looks at an image and it groups similar pixels together. So if you have an image with a lot of sky, it doesn't group all those individual pixels. They're very similar in tone and brightness, so it kind of clumps them together. And it looks at them as a single value. So it has a lot less data to deal with than the original RAW file. But you sacrifice, because now you won't have those gradations in tone in the JPEG file. And you look at your sky in the JPEG image and you might see streaks across the sky. That's called banding. And it comes from the compressing, because it looks at similar pixels as a group, not individually. Compression. Okay, compressions can be a good thing if you're concerned about storage space, but a bad thing if you're talking about, because you're talking about reducing the quality of the image. So usually you want to minimize the compression, unless you're putting your photo on Facebook and you don't give a crap. Anyway, let's move on. So these three pictures all have the same pixel dimensions. They just have different formats, file formats, and different levels of compression. So when you look at the megabytes of an image, how much storage space it takes up on your hard drive, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you how much space that photo takes up on your hard drive. What else does it tell you? Almost nothing. Okay, almost nothing. Okay, and I should have put this slide first. Looking at the megabytes of a file only tells you, it's an indication of how much storage space it takes up on the hard drive. It does not tell you anything about the dimensions of the photo. It does not tell you anything about how large that picture will display on your computer screen. It does not tell you anything about how large that photo can be printed. It does not tell you anything about the quality of the image. Okay? So you could have an image that's 60 megabytes and you figure, great, I have a beautiful picture. Well, not necessarily. That just tells you how much space it takes up on the hard drive. It doesn't tell you anything else about the image. Remember, pixel dimensions are the best judge of the size of a photo. Then when you get into quality, that depends on a lot of other things like file format, amount of compression, da-da. Okay?
Hey, Dennis.
Yes.
Hey, Dan here.
Yes.
Real quickly, understand that a large file size does not indicate that it'll be of a higher quality, but you could say if it was a small file size, there's essentially no way you could get a high quality out of a small computer file size, correct?
Depends. Depends on how small you're talking about and what your use is for the image. So if you want to put an image posted on Facebook, you can have a pretty good looking image and it can be darn small.
Right. But if you're sending something to the printer and he sees it's a half a megabyte, you can probably assume that's going to be junk.
Okay, this is where we're going. We're talking right now about looking at our photos on a screen. And when you go to print, it's a whole different ballgame because you need lots more pixels. They have to be compacted together a lot in order to get a quality print. So then you say, well, I only have a half a megabyte file. How's it going to print? Well, if you're printing a postage stamp, it might be fine. It'll look good. But if you're printing a 5x7, it'll start to look maybe pixelated, or something bigger, it'll look terrible. So it's kind of an indication, but that's only one of the factors. You have to be very, very careful, especially when you go to printing as compared to displaying on a screen. So let's back up a little bit, and let's say you don't necessarily use Photoshop, but you're interested in what the pixel dimensions are of your photographs. Okay, I'm going to go through each one, like Windows, Mac, Photoshop. Yeah, and so here's how you can tell. This would be for the pixel dimensions, which will give you MPs, and probably the storage space for the image, MPs and MBs, and pixel dimensions. Okay, so if you're on a Windows computer, just open the photo in Windows, okay, from File Explorer or whatever. Navigate to your file, right-click on the image and select File Info, or it might be Properties, depending on which version of Windows you have. And then in the Properties box, click on Details, and you'll get something that looks like this. Okay, here's info. Oh, I should have put this in red. Info. See File Info right there? And when I clicked on File Info, this is what came up. This shows, this is the screen. There's the untitled name of the photo. But down here's what we're interested in. It shows you the actual pixel dimensions, okay, of that photo. Okay, 1,200 by 900. And when you multiply, then you'd have to multiply those together to get the total number of megapixels, right? Okay. And it estimates that the amount of storage space that this picture takes up on my hard drive is only 553 kilobytes. Kilobytes, thousands of bytes. Okay, so it's not a real big file. We'll get into this other stuff later. Don't worry about it. But on a Windows machine, that's how you can get the pixel dimensions and the total number of pixels. Then you multiply, and the storage amount of storage space that the image consumes. All right. Now, if you're on a Mac, I didn't test this on a Mac. I just pulled it off the internet, but I think that's what you do with a Mac. So you can look at that on the PowerPoint tomorrow. If you're using Lightroom Classic, okay, the I key, when you tap the I key on Lightroom Classic, it brings up an information box over top the part of the photo, up at the top of the screen. And some of the information that can be displayed will be the pixel dimensions and the total number of pixels. So it looks like this for this example, this with that Fuller Lake image that I showed you. And those are the pixel dimensions. And if you multiply them together and then move the decimal place over 6 to the left, you get 20.0. So 20 megapixels. Now, finding how much storage space it takes up on the hard drive is another matter. We'll look at that here next. Okay, but if you tap the I key, once will turn it off, once will turn it on for identity number 1 or info plate number 1, tapping a second time will info plate number 2. If you find that the info plate does not give you the information that you want, you can, pardon me, you can change that. And here's how you do it. Pardon me. You go up to the top of the screen where the tabs are, and it says view, and you tap on view, and then you go to view options, and this dialog box comes up, and then it shows you what loop info 1 will show and loop info 2, and then you can click on the tabs and you can change it so it shows other information. Okay, so have it show information that you're interested in. Okay, next, the megabytes. If you're in Lightroom Classic and you want to know how much storage space the file takes up on your computer, and if I sound repetitive, that's because I'm trying to drive this home. Megabytes is storage space. Got me? Okay, so what you do is you go over in the library module to the metadata panel. Now in the metadata panel, right here, you have a little, you can click on these and you can show different types of metadata. The only one that shows the megabytes is this one, EXIF and IPTC. And then right here, it'll show you the file size in MBs, megabytes. Okay, so that's how to get that to that in Lightroom Classic. Now, Photoshop, we already showed you that. You go to image size, and that's the dialog box that comes up. And as I told you, the M here stands for MB, MB, not MP, MB, the storage space. And here it shows 26.0 megabytes of storage space. Okay, take a break. Questions before we get into resolution? Storage space, megabytes. Anybody have any questions?
Dennis, this is Dave again.
Sure.
I saw on YouTube one time that somebody said you could print on a billboard, excuse me, an image from an iPhone. So I know it's got to do with distance and all the rest of it, but it just doesn't seem intuitive. Can you do it?
Well, there's two things that come into play. Number one is the distance away, because as you know, if you get up close to a digital billboard, it really looks pixelated. It's designed to be viewed from, pretty far away.
Right.
The other thing is this issue of, we're going to get to at the end, but I'm not going to get into the details, of resampling. So there are programs on the market that can upsize your file. So no matter whether it's from an iPhone or from your Sony camera or your Canon camera or your Nikon camera, you can take that photo and run it through this program like Topaz Gigapixel, and it upsizes the file. And here's what it does. It's the process in science is called interpolation. It analyzes all the pixels and then it adds pixels in between pixels that are similar. So it'll create a pixel and add it in here and make it look like the pixels around it. Now, this is incredible because it does it. There's millions of pixels, in your image. So it's adding pixels here, and it increases the total number of pixels in your image, okay, which increases its storage size too, but it does increase the number of pixels and allows you to print to a larger size or display on a larger monitor. So can be done. Yeah. And
that's helpful. Thanks.
Photoshop and even Lightroom can do that to some degree. But Topaz Gigapixel is the one that started this years ago, and it really does it to a large extent and does it very well. Any other questions on bytes and megabytes before I move on to resolution?
I have a question for you,
Yes, Terry.
Dennis. Is it true that, let's say, a 45 megapixel sensor is going to be less sensitive for doing photos in subdued light compared to a 20 megapixel camera?
Can't answer that. Don't know. It depends on other factors. It's just a complicated issue. So it could go either way. Yeah, there's no way to answer that question as far as I know. Just having more megapixels, okay, does not help in that regard. It makes your image larger, okay, and you have more data to work with, but it doesn't say the image is going to be of any higher quality or that the noise is going to be any lower.
I find my 45 megapixel sensor is less sensitive in low light than my 20 megapixel.
Yes, that could be
because
true.
Because the pixels are much smaller. They're half the size of the 20 to get that many in the same sensor.
Very good, very good. And now we go back to David's question about the size of the photo sites on the sensor. So yes, if you're cramming, and I've heard this true of the R5 compared to the R6, true. You know, the R5 we said has twice as many, creates a file twice as many megapixels, but they're all in the same size sensor physically. So to get that many more pixels in, you have to cram them in, and they are physically smaller. Smaller pixels tend to generate, or photo sites tend to generate more noise. So it's a pretty well documented fact that the R5, even though it creates photos that have twice as many pixels as the R6, is noisier because of the size of the photo sites. Yes, so thanks. That ties in well with David's question. Okay, moving right along here, guys. Anything else? Resolution is the last thing we'll get into, and it's a little more complex, but let me attack this one, if you will. Okay. Technically, I have not heard it addressed this way, but in my research, I'm presenting it to you because I think it's the easiest way to understand this concept of resolution. Okay, because so many people get it totally whacked out. Okay, think of resolution as being in 3 different types: image resolution, display or screen resolution, and print resolution. Think of them as 3 different things. Let's take image resolution first. I'll define image resolution as a software setting. I know that sounds kind of strange, because what I'm going to say here is that image resolution is a setting that will determine how tightly the image pixels are packed together, only if and when you make a print. What that means is image resolution is an imaginary number. Or as I was watching a video today where the photographer said it's fictional. It's make-believe. It's imaginary. So here's what it's good for, and here's what it's not good for. Okay? Image resolution is expressed as PPI, or pixels per inch. Okay? It's a ratio, just like these other ones that I have listed here. If you're talking about driving in your car, everybody talks about, hey, how's good your gas mileage? Well, my gas mileage is, 39 miles per hour, MPH. That's a ratio, miles per hour, okay? Or how fast are you going? Oh, I'm going 65 miles per hour. That's a ratio. Pressure in your tires. Oh, my tire's low. I got to stop and get, well, how much are you putting in? 32. 32 what? PSI, pounds per square inch. Okay, those are all ratios. So frequently today we see people and manufacturers refer to like screen resolution as the pixel dimensions. Well, that's confusing. That's not the way the term is officially defined. Resolution is a ratio. Okay, it's a ratio of the number of pixels in every square inch. Well, let's see what that means. Let's go back to my simplified diagram. I was so pleased I came across this on the internet. Here we know, we already know the pixel dimensions are 7 by 7. right? We already went through this. So how many pixels high? 7. How many pixels wide? 7. We already did this. What are the pixel dimensions? 7 pixels by 7 pixels. How many total pixels are there? Already did this. 49. Ooh, what's the resolution? Well, if you go by my diagram and we imagine that this pixel is 1 inch in length and width, okay, 1 inch, then there are 7 pixels per inch. The resolution of this illustration is 7 ppi. Does that make sense? 7. Now, if it continued, well, I'll get to that in a second. I do that. This particular illustration has 7 pixels in an inch. So its resolution is 7 ppi. Okay, let's go on. So if you're into sewing, and I'm not, but I picked this up on the internet and I thought it was cool, especially for somebody who sews. If you're into thread count, okay, like if you buy new sheets and you want to have really nice smooth sheets, then you're interested in probably a higher thread count because those threads are closer together to give you a smoother feel. You get those threads further apart and it gives the fabric a rough feeling, which you don't want on your smooth skin. Okay, so there's the details about thread count. Let's go to the next example. Now I have 4 of these blocks. So let's presume now that this is my digital image or a digital sensor. Okay, so let's go through the same scenario. How many pixels wide is this digital image? Count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 14. You got it, 14. So now the pixel dimensions are 14 wide. It has more pixels in it, twice as many. Okay. How many pixels long? Oops, I went the wrong dimension. I should have gone this way. 14 high, 14 wide. Pixel dimensions are now 14 pixels by 14 pixels. How many total pixels? Oh, who has the calculator out? It's 14 times 14. What's that, 228? If I remember that correctly, I should have done that. 228 total pixels. Well, the next question is, what's the resolution of the image? Trick question. Look at the diagram. How many pixels are there per inch? Giving you time to think about it. 7. 7 pixels per inch. So, just like in the first smaller diagram, okay, you compare the two, this one has fewer overall pixels. It only has 49 compared to 228. But they have exactly the same resolution. The pixels are packed just as tightly in this one as they are in this one. 7 per inch. 7 pixels per inch. Resolution is the same. So resolution tells you nothing about the total number of pixels that you have. It only tells you how many there are per inch. So the more inches you have in the picture, the more the total number, the greater the total number of pixels. Make sense? Yeah, let's keep going. Now, here's what the end result would be. If I decide to print an image and I have a high, the pixel resolution is high enough, I get a good looking image like this. If it's not, it might come out looking pixelated, but that's only if I print. That's the end result. So what if we're not printing? So image resolution describes how tightly the pixels will be packed together, but only if you print. It does not say anything, I'm repetitive here, does not say anything about how big the file is, doesn't say anything about the total number of pixels, doesn't say anything about how large you can print. Okay, the resolution only tells you how many pixels are in every inch. Conclusion: image resolution of a photo file is meaningless unless as it's displayed on the monitor screen. Okay, doesn't mean anything. Okay, and I could show you this. Well, I could go, let's see if I go to Photoshop. Let me just quickly show you this. And I don't want to run too late here. Can you see my Photoshop screen? Did it switch? Okay, very good, very good. So now I'm in Photoshop, and if I go like I did before up here to image size, oh, I get that dialog box comes up. Okay, now here's the little, this is important. See, this box is checked. It says resample. If I leave that checked, then Photoshop is going to add or take away pixels. That's resampling. Okay, I don't want to do that right now. Okay, I don't want to resize my image. We'll do that later. I'm going to uncheck that so I leave the same number of pixels. How many? Well, 4,032 on the width and 2,258 on the height. Okay, well, there's the resolution, 240. Let me change it. Oh, let me go to 20. Okay, 20. What changed? Nothing. The pixel dimensions didn't change. This shows you, if you printed the image, how large the image would be in inches. That didn't change either. Well, let me change the resolution to 200. Oh, well, that didn't change either. Okay, but if I were to change, let me see. What I'm trying to say here is that the number in this box does not change the number of pixels. It doesn't change the pixel dimensions. It doesn't change anything except, it doesn't even change the display size, okay, of the image on the screen. It only makes a change when you go to print. So let me go back here to, now if this all is starting to get a little blurry, hang on, we'll try to make sense of it. Now there's a different type of resolution called the display resolution, and that's how many pixels are being displayed on your monitor or your TV. Okay. Now this has nothing to do with the image resolution. It has to do with the way the monitor was made, okay, or the TV was made. How many pixel sites on the screen are there? Okay. And it just depends on how it was made. It has nothing to do with the resolution of the image that we just looked at, or what's going to happen when it's printed. This is just how it's being displayed by the particular device that you are viewing. So here are some examples. If you have an old computer monitor, it might have a low resolution of 72 ppi, 72 pixels per inch, actually physically making up that screen. Newer ones are closer to 96, okay, or higher. In fact, if you have one of the new Retina screens, it might have a resolution of 200 ppi. So those pixels on the screen are packed tightly together, 200 in every inch of the screen. Well, you know what that means. If you don't have a Retina screen and you're thinking about getting one, think of the practical implications. If you look at a picture on your screen now that's displaying it at 96 ppi, and then you take that same image and you display it on a Retina display that packs those pixels closer together and puts 200 of them in every inch, okay? 200 is about twice as many in every inch as 96. Your image is only going to be half as large on the screen, okay? If viewed at 100% in Photoshop, you would have to enlarge it artificially on the screen and able to show that. And let me show that in Photoshop. Okay, let's bring Photoshop back up here and get rid of this. Oh, invalid number. This image, that's not the full image that's being displayed. Okay, but if you look down here in the lower corner, it says 100%. So this is being displayed at the 100% of like the pixel dimensions compared to the screen resolution. Now you can always you can always zoom in. Okay, and there you start. If I just artificially zoom in the image, I'm looking deeper and deeper into that image, and I can see the pixels of the individual image. If I go out further, then I'm looking at it, compressing that together. Well, I'm looking at it at a smaller percentage, and now you don't notice the pixelation. So the point is, on any screen, like in Photoshop or Lightroom Classic, you can always zoom in or zoom out. But what's important is what the image looks like at 100%. Okay? That's the best way to look at it. So, okay, so the higher the display resolution of your screen, okay, your monitor or your TV, the smoother the photo will look because the pixels are closer together. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so as I said, if it's displayed on a higher resolution screen, then you need more pixels to make it look larger. Okay, so if you take an image and you display it on a monitor that has 96 pixels per inch, okay, it might look a certain size. If you look at the same image at 100% on a retina screen that has 200 pixels per inch, it'll only look half as big. So you would need more pixels to look at it the same size. You'd have to spread it out more. Now, the confusion with folks, TV manufacturers and others, is that they have developed their own shortcut way of talking about display resolution. They tend to talk about it in terms of the pixel dimensions. So if Samsung here is saying that the resolution of this particular TV screen is 1,920 pixels by 1,084 pixels, they're technically talking about the pixel dimensions. How many actual pixels, display pixels. This has nothing to do with your photo. Okay, this is how many display pixels there are on that particular TV screen. And to be technically correct, they shouldn't call that the resolution. They should call that the pixel dimensions, the display pixel dimensions. Now, let's go to the last one, and then I'll entertain questions here because it's getting kind of late right after this. If we talk about printing, it's a whole different ballgame. Okay, printing now involves taking your image on the screen and converting it to micro dots of ink on a piece of paper. That's a totally different ballgame. And that's where things get a little confusing, because in that conversion process, okay, and you're talking about dots of ink per inch. There it is, DPI, okay? Pixels in your image aren't the same thing as dots of ink on a piece of paper. There's a conversion there that takes place. And these dots of ink are so small that it takes many, 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 many little micro dots of ink to make up just one pixel of your picture. So when you talk about DPI, you might be talking 1,400 DPI, which are dots per inch, whenever the pixel value, the pixel resolution of your image that you set in your software might have only been 300. So you have 300 pixels per inch equating to little mini tiny micro dots of ink on a piece of paper that might be 1,400 per inch. So there's a confusion there. But the fact is that the more pixels you have, the more dots of ink it's going to take to make your image. So for all practical purposes, it's kind of fighting a losing battle. So many people now confuse the two that you almost give up and you just say, okay, well, whether you're talking about DPI or PPI, we're talking about resolution. They're different things, but people get confused and they just talk about them in the same way. So print resolution, DPI, refers to dots of ink per inch. PPI refers to the number of pixels per inch. And think in your mind, well, there's a conversion that's taking place there. I'm looking at a picture on the computer monitor, and we got all three kinds. The image has a certain resolution, okay? It has a certain number of pixels that are together there to make up the image. But then the display device displays them at a certain display resolution. And then when you go to print them, the dots of ink are made for each pixel, which then you have dots of ink representing, pixels in the image. So all practical purposes, you can pretty much give up the battle and refer to PPI and DPI interchangeably. But as I said, you might have 1,400 or 2,800 dots of ink per inch for an image that was set for 300 pixels per inch, because it takes a lot of those little micro dots to make up even one pixel. But the end result is, the higher you set the resolution for the pixels, and the higher you set the resolution for the dots per ink, the higher the quality of the image is going to be to a certain degree. You can set the print resolution. Let's say you go up to 2,880 microdots per inch. Well, you probably won't be able to tell any difference between that and a print that you would have made at 1440, because after a while, it's just diminishing returns. You just can't see a difference. And you might even be using more ink. Okay. So you come to an optimum there where you don't want to, set it too high. But it's that conversion process going from pixels to dots of ink that is important to remember. So just to finish up here, if you had a certain image and now you know how to find the pixel dimensions of that image, okay, in Lightroom Classic or Windows or your Mac computer or Photoshop, okay, and you ask yourself, oh, well, I wonder how large I could print that image. Well, of course, it depends the quality, what resolution are you going to set? But here's the ideal. Let's look at some examples. What you would do is you would take the pixel dimensions and divide by the resolution. So 300, okay, PPI is a very typical resolution, print resolution. If you're thinking about having an image printed, you'd set the print resolution at 300 PPI. So what you do is you take the pixel dimensions, and let's take our example. Let's say it had 3,000 pixels high. You would, okay, don't get confused here. Oh, here we go. Okay, if you had 3,000 pixels in the width of the image, you divide it by the resolution. If you're setting that at 300, that's pretty standard for printing, as I said, then you could print this picture up to 10 inches wide, okay? And it wouldn't look pixelated. It should look fine. You might go a little higher and you'd still be okay, but this gives you a ballpark figure, just an estimate. And then likewise, the height of it would be, if it's 2,000 pixels, that's divided by 300, that would be 6.7 inches. But what it tells you is you can find the pixel dimensions of any of your images, and then you can estimate how large you could have them printed without upsizing. This would be what we call the native resolution that comes from the camera, not artificially adding pixels to it like I did when I talked about gigapixel or resampling, in Photoshop. Give you a couple other examples real quickly here. Let's say, as I said, 300 PPI is the standard. If you're sending it to have it printed somewhere like MPix, 300, that'll be fine. So the Canon R6, we already talked about its pixel dimensions. If I was sending it to MPix, I'd go 300 PPI. Well, how large could I have it printed? Oh, like 18 by 12. That's about as large as I should go with my camera. Yeah, maybe a little larger, I can get away with it, but that would be a good quality print, no problem. Canon R5, oh, I can go higher. It's almost twice as big. Okay, the Sony, holy cow, almost 32 by 21 inches. Because, you've got more pixels to work with, okay? You can get a larger print out of those printing and in this case, printing at 300 pixels per inch. Now, how many of you print canvas gallery prints? Okay, if you do, you probably know that you can get away with a lower resolution. You can print canvas at as low as 150 ppi. And if you use the same images from these same cameras, now look, you can get images that are twice as large, because 150 is half of 300. So that means your numbers over here are going to be twice what they were before. So if you have an image that you really, really like and you want to put it really big on your wall, but it's not going to print really well as a regular paper print, and you don't want to resize it, print it as a canvas. Okay, it'll still look good as a canvas, and you can print it twice as large. Now, the whole other ball game that I'm getting to, and I'm not going to have time to get into, is resampling. If you want your image larger and smaller, then you can go in a program like Lightroom Classic or Photoshop, and you can have it, you can tell it, hey, I want this image to be larger, add pixels, interpolate. You know, that process of comparing it to the surrounding pixels and adding pixels in there. And then when you check your image size, you know, the dimensions, it's going to be more pixels than it was before. Okay, and you can enlarge quite a bit, and that means you can print pretty much as large as you want. Image quality these days, still really good, if you use, you know, a quality method for doing that. Okay, and when you do that, it's very complicated how they do that, the algorithms that are used, because if you go into Photoshop and you go down here, and now I have resampled click checked, pardon me, look at the options. These are different algorithms that are used depending on whether you're upscaling, upsizing, or downsizing your image. And Photoshop uses different methods to calculate how to either add the pixels or take away pixels. And as I said, taking away pixels is more difficult because you end up with, it's more likely to end up with a lower quality image if you downsize it. I'm sorry. No, downsizing is good. Got confused there. Downsizing is good because you're taking away images and you're left with the originals. When you upsize it, you have to interpolate. You're more likely to run into problems. But these are all very different, very complex methods for either adding pixels or taking pixels away. Okay. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up there. If I do a follow-up on this, which I probably won't be able to do before I go on my trip, the next part would be how to do the resizing. So let's say you have an image, a regular photo from your camera, and you cropped it, and now it's pretty small, and it's not going to look good when you send it in for an image review or a competition, or you have it printed. How can you upsize it and still get it to look good? Okay. Or if you have a large image and you want to downsize it for whatever reason, you know, how do you go about that? So that presentation would divide it up, and I'd show you how to do that in the different programs, just like I did here with finding. And then I was going to get into bit depth. This is getting late, and you know, I'm rambling. So we'll save bit depth for some other time, but that's also an important factor. It has to do with the number of colors that an image can display. So guys, let's wrap it up and just entertain any questions that you might have. The last page lists a number of the resources that I used, a few, to put this program together. So when you get the PDF tomorrow, you'll be able to click on any of those and get more information. Go back to the source. So if you don't believe me, you know, check with them. Okay, any questions?
Dennis, it's Elaine Shook. I
Hi,
have
Elaine.
two questions that are somewhat related. You referred to earlier to the Topaz gigapixel program.
Yes.
Do they use basically a resampling process to achieve the greater resolution?
Yes.
So that is essentially what it's doing, is resampling.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's the only way. That's the only way to get more pixels. That's the only way to get an image to be the size that you're talking about with that image, is it has to add pixels. Now, how many of you are longtime Photoshop users? Okay. If you are, you may pardon me, my lips are getting tired. You may remember the day, and it wasn't too many years ago, that the recommended procedure, if you wanted to make your image larger, is you would upsize it in multiple steps. You would only do it by a small percentage, like 5% each time. But you would do that multiple times to increase or to maintain the quality of the image. Well, that's no longer the case. That the next step was, oh, you don't have to do that. You can just do it in one step. Well, now you do it in one step, and like programs like Gigapixel, you can get immensely large images. I mean, immense, and it's amazing how good they are. Question
Okay,
number
so
two.
My question, the second question was related to in-camera high-resolution shooting modes, which many newer cameras have today, including mine. How does that process compare to resampling or the Gigapixel program in process, and how does it compare in quality?
Well, let's take the first one. In camera, your sensor, all the sensors, initially, they capture all the information that they can capture with as many photo sites as they have on the sensor. Okay, and as I showed you in that early slide, like the Sony AR-57 has, 60 million, pixel sites. The R6 of mine only has 20 million. So no matter what camera you have, when you take the picture, initially, it gets the data from all of those sensors in a raw format. What it does with that information is up to what you have set on your camera. If you have it set to uncompressed raw, the camera says, here you go, Elaine, there's your file. It's uncompressed, it's raw, I haven't done much of anything to it, almost. It's your job to work with it. You get the data. If you say, oh, I want raw files, yeah, but they're so large, I want them a little bit smaller. Well, the camera then goes through this complex process of compressing the file, not reducing the number of pixels. Okay, same number of pixels, but somehow, and I don't even know how this magic occurs, but I think it's similar to what the JPEG process is, where it starts to analyze the image and looks at pixels that are of similar tone and brightness, okay, that they can group together. Now, that's a bad term, group together, because that would imply that they're combining pixels. No, they're not. But somehow the magic occurs that they keep the same number of pixels, but they compress the file. And then some cameras have a higher compression rate than that, but you still get the same number of pixels, and basically nothing else has been done to, no processing, like no contrast, no brightness adjustment, no clarity, none of that stuff. However, if you decide, oh, I want to go JPEG, whoa, that's a whole new ballgame. Still your image, the sensor captures the same raw information to begin with, but then it analyzes the image, it compresses it, and it changes the file format from RAW to JPEG, and you get a much smaller file, but it has already compressed it, set the contrast, set the sharpness, set the, all those factors that you do when you go into like Lightroom Classic or Adobe Camera Raw. It has already done those things for you, and then you get a JPEG file that's much smaller, but you're much more limited in what you can do with that file. Now, you then have that file, and then what you can do with it depends on which option you chose. If you want to go to Topaz Gigapixel and you want to upsize it, well, guess what? Your best bet for maintaining the quality is if you're working with that number one scenario, the uncompressed raw file. Topaz Gigapixel or any other program, Photoshop or whatever, will do the highest quality job of upsizing or downsizing with that original uncompressed file. If you've chosen one of the compression methods, okay, like compressed raw, yeah, it's not going to do it quite as well. If you've chosen a JPEG, you're almost out of luck because the image has been compressed so much that even gigapixel won't have much luck working with it. Does that answer your question, Elaine?
Not really. I think I probably didn't state the question very well.
Try again.
My camera has a high-res shooting mode, which actually increases the number of pixels coming out of the camera. And I think there is has something to do with the sensor
Pixel
shifting.
binning. Pixel
It-
binning.
A pixel shift.
Pixel shift, thank you.
Yes.
Kurt,
that's-
So I was
want-
wondering if that really gives you the same quality as it would going into gigapixel or some other resampling process. I have used the high-res shooting mode on several occasions and compared it to the image coming out at the normal shooting mode, and I don't see any difference. Now, I have not tried printing each of those at the high-res compared to the normal shooting mode, so I don't know what I would see if I did print it. But do you have any experience with that in terms of the difference in quality using that in-camera high-res mode?
Only what I've read. It's a very new technology and it's very technical. And from what I understand, my camera doesn't do that. It relates to pixel binning. But Kurt, you seem to have some knowledge in that. Would you comment?
It's offered in the firmware upgrade for my R5.
Oh,
And
okay.
basically it's shifting, it's giving you 4 images and combining them into one.
Oh, so it's compositing.
So to speak, yes.
Okay. Yes, I have read that you end up with very large files. So if that's the case, if it's compositing, you're just adding originally captured pixels from 4 different images, and you'd be maintaining the image quality. I would expect then the image quality would be excellent.
Dennis, I think I've read that cell phones do binning too to get the increased pixels.
Yes, now that's a different process now that I understand from what Kurt said. Kurt's saying the camera is taking 4 separate pictures and combining them together into composite. And in the iPhones, you have a different process called pixel binning, and that's very technical, but it's different from pixel shifting. Okay, guys, it's almost 8:30. Any other questions I can respond to before we wrap it up here? I hope you've enjoyed this. It does get technical, and as I say, I've simplified this a bit so you can delve into this in much, much more detail, but hopefully it's been helpful.
I've enjoyed it, Dennis, but I have one slight comment. The rubber meets the road when you need to know how many pixels you need to do a certain print. Right?
Right. Yeah, that's what my one slide was about, was showing how large you could print.
But people argue about how many pixels you need. And it's almost like the camera companies are increasing the amount of pixels they've got simply as a sales device. Whether it might not improve the pictures.
Well, yeah, the number of pixels does not equate to quality necessarily, as we indicated before, but it does equate to how large you can print. So the question becomes, how large do you want to print? And when's the last time that any of you printed larger than as large as 2 by 3 feet, even? And it just isn't done all that much. So yeah, for the and even if you've got one of the smaller sensors like I do with the R6, with the software that's available now for upsizing, yeah, that's really not a problem. I can take my image in, and if I want to print large on an image or two, upsize it. Okay, anything else?
Isn't it true that the image that you see on the back of the camera is a JPEG, and it is not actually what you will get when you look at the raw file.
Very true. Very true. Especially this can be especially problematic if you shoot raw, because people think they're looking at the raw image, and in fact, you can't see a raw image. The camera has processed that image. The image you see on the back of the camera is a JPEG, and it has been processed. It's been compressed. The sharpness has been set. The color saturation, all those things have been set. And you say, well, to what degree have they been set? Well, if you're familiar with picture styles, okay, that's what Canon calls it. Nikon calls it picture controls, I think. But each manufacturer has a different term for it. You can go into the menu setting and you see these picture controls or styles, and it gives you the option of setting the contrast, the sharpness, all those sorts of things. And the only time that comes into play is when you generate a JPEG. So if you have your camera set to shoot JPEG, that's what it's going by. It's going by whichever picture style you have designated. But even if you have it set to RAW, the image you're looking at on the back of the camera is displayed according to the picture style that you have set in the menus. Plus, it's so small that it's not, an accurate representation. Now, that follows through, then it also is true that when you go to Lightroom Classic and you're looking at your image initially, Lightroom Classic makes a preview. That's part of the process of importing of every RAW file. Okay. Again, even in Lightroom Classic, you're looking at a JPEG preview of the RAW file. It's just an estimation of what that photo might look like when converted to an image that you can see, like a JPEG or a PSD or a TIFF. Anything else? Okay, if there's interest, when I get back, I can put together a follow-up presentation about actual resizing. And I think that I'll probably do it anyway, because I think that would be good, because it has a very practical purpose, which is if you want to submit an image to a photography club competition or image review, then we tell you that the optimum image size, 2,650 pixels on the longest dimension. The other dimension just depends on the aspect ratio of your image. But if you resize it or size it to that size, it'll look the biggest and the best when we display it. Okay, and that has to do with the website and how we handle the website handles the image. But that, they say, is the optimum size, goes by pixels. It also means that this whole presentation, the confusion, I have seen so many competition requirements from other competitions, and they'll say, oh, send us an image that's no greater than 5 megabytes at 300 DPI. Well, you know what that means? Absolutely nothing. It doesn't say anything, because an image doesn't have a DPI unless you print it, and 500 megabytes is how much storage space it takes up on the computer. It has nothing to do with image quality or the size you can print or anything else. So that's nonsensical. And I've tried to talk with a couple of people about that, and their eyes glaze over, and I haven't gone through this presentation with them yet, but hopefully you understand that when somebody tells you that, they don't understand the concepts of pixels, okay, bytes, bits and bytes, and resolution.
Dennis, this is George again. When you do your program on upsizing, would you also include noise reduction? I've been trying to see how much I can do with what little I've got. Now, I have a little pocket camera which has 12 megabytes, okay? And using denoise and upsizing, I can get what I think pretty darn good pictures out of it.
What are you using to do that?
For the camera or for the
Topaz?
Topaz, I use AI Clear more than I use the AI Photo because it's quicker, and I use On One upsize because it's quicker than the Topaz.
Okay.
And I think this is good.
All right. For my presentation, actually, from the theoretical aspect, it best if I divorce the two issues. But, the practicality of it is, just as you understand, is the two do go together in a practical sense. And that's why the software producers like Topaz Photo AI are
Yeah.
combining the two. So when Photo AI looks at your image, it uses its artificial intelligence to reduce the noise, and at the same time, if you want to increase the resolution, you can. So
Yeah,
they've
but
combined
this
them.
is screw up faces.
It can, yeah, it can. Yeah, it can make them look weird.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, guys?
Dennis, this is Joan again. This presentation has really made me think about a lot of things. When you come back and do the next one, do you think the different ways to export photos would be a good part of that presentation? I know it sounds simple to a lot of people, but when you're exporting these pictures for somebody to print, okay, for like wedding pictures and stuff, I just want to make sure that I have got them exactly right.
Absolutely.
I thought I did, but now I'm, raising questions in my mind that, like you said, maybe I'm thinking PPI versus DPI and things like that.
Yeah,
A good
absolutely.
topic idea.
Yeah, resizing is the general concept that I'm dealing with referring to here. Exporting happens to be Lightroom Classic's specific process that includes the resizing, or can, if you choose to. So yes, in the presentation, when I talk about resizing and I get to how to do it in Lightroom, it would be done through exporting.
Great. That sounds great, because I have gone in and resized stuff. And then I'm like, okay, well, now when I export this, what should I do now? Because I've resized it. How am I going to resize this again when I export it?
My suggestion is wait. Don't resize it until you export. That's when you resize your image.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. And if you'd like, I could send you a link to a video about resizing in Lightroom Classic or about exporting.
Oh, that would be fantastic, because
Okay.
there's so much out there. One person says do it this way, one person says do it that way, especially if they want to sell you presets and this is
Sure.
going to make it look great and
Well,
etc.
Anthony Morganti has a great video on exporting, and he gets into that resizing part of and does a great job. But that'll fit right in with what we're talking about here. As the resizing is one part of the exporting process in Lightroom
Perfect.
Classic.
Thank you.
You're
Have a
welcome.
great trip, by the way.
Well, thank you. You'll be able to follow my exploits if you friend me on Facebook.
I am your friend on Facebook. I followed you around the world going,
There.
I really wish I were there.
Thank you. Thank
Have
you.
a great time.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks.
Dennis. It was great.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else? We're down to 19, withering away. But thanks for hanging on, you diehards.
Dennis, that was really good. I enjoyed it and I learned a lot.
Joe, did you
Yeah.
appreciate the fact that I kept the math to a minimum?
You did.
Yeah.
You did very good.
Joe's
Very
eyes
good.
gloss over when we start talking math. I told him I just downloaded a new book for my Kindle for the trip, and it's one about simplifying concepts in mathematics.
Oh,
I'm going to send him a
God.
copy.
Okay.
This doesn't sound like a
All right, guys.
romantic cruise.
Yes, I do that in my spare time. Let me
Good luck.
stop
Thanks,
the
Dennis.
stop the
Bon
sharing.
voyage, Dennis.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you,
guys.
Dennis.
Stop
Dennis.
the recording.
Thanks, Dennis.
Okay, now if anybody has anything private they want to say, they can stop the recording.
Just be safe.